So I watched Castlevania Nocturne about
7
months ago, and while the show has its highs and lows, it's still immensely enjoyable. It has a rich and diverse cast, and I actually really like Richter as the new protagonist Belmont. He's different from Trevor in an interesting way. However, one thing stuck out to me in the very last episode of the season. It was when Alucard appeared like a bolt from the blue, unceremoniously perforated Jolta like she didn't even matter, and then Richter looked Alucard in the windows of his soul and said,
"Are you really Alucard? I thought you were just a myth."
And my instant reaction was, fucking how? Now, I'm not trying to be pedantic over the details. I assure you I'm not. Please ignore every other video I've made on this channel, as well as the name of this channel. But just a few episodes previous, young Richter was boasting to his deadbeat granddad that, yes indeed, he knew well the Belmont and Belnades family history of the last 300 years. And while that doesn't necessarily mean he should have met Alucard before, it does seem a little strange to assume he was a myth given the context. That being the case, and given that there's a village by the name of Belmont, which hosts both the Belmont Stronghold of Artifacts and Knowledge, as well as Castle Dracula, a wonder of alchemy, magic, and technology. Wait. Oh no. I see the issue here. Truth be told, I had never watched seasons 3 or 4 of Castlevania when they first arrived, so I watched them both back to back before I watched Nocturne. And in doing so, by the time I reached the end of Nocturne Season 1, my mind was following what should have been a solid line of connections from the first series, starting from Castlevania Season 1. A line that, how should I put this, doesn't actually exist? You see, both Castlevania and its sequel series Nocturne are amazing shows, but in sequence, aspects of the plot and characterization become, let's say, unwieldy over time. We're going to start at the beginning, and by that I mean the very beginning of the Netflix franchise, Castlevania Episode 1, where we are introduced to one Lisa from Lupu, soon to be Lisa Tepes. In terms of characterization, we could go through the intricacies of narrative arcs, of how traits and tropes evolve through character development, but I'm going to keep things very simple. For every plot device character we look at, we're only going to explore 4 concepts: what they love, what they hate, what they desire, what they fear. Now, Lisa has an incredibly small amount of screen time, to the point that she almost seems like nothing more than a plot point. That's because she kinda is, if we're being honest. I mean, her death is what kicks off the events of the entire series, yet she gets almost no characterization beyond the first episode. Now, I'm about to argue that none of this matters. The reason being is that she passes our little 4-question test. She loves science, reason, and learning. She hates ignorance and superstition. She desires to improve humanity's knowledge. And she fears the degradation which dogma and anti-intellectualism can lead to. Interestingly enough, she is one of 3 characters used as plot devices in the first season, the other 2 being Vlad Dracula Tepes himself, and the man with no name, the Bishop. They also directly revolve around one another: the wife killer, and the husband who goes on a murderous rampage.
Yeah, I'm thinking I'm back.
And by the end of the first season, neither Dracula nor the Bishop can properly answer these 4 questions. In fairness to the Bishop, he was, well, kissed to death. The Bishop can only really answer one of our 4 questions. He hates heresy against the Church and God. In reality, He acts as a bigger plot device than even Lisa does, since it's his wanton act of violence that starts everything in motion. And yet, Season 1 is masterful and exquisite despite this very shallow characterization. This is because Lisa and the Bishop represent two sides of a powerful scale, one which forms the fundamental basis of Season 1. The balance between, on the one hand, ignorance and hate, and on the other hand, progress and hope. And Dracula stands at the center of this balance, less of a character himself, and more like an event, a force of nature. In a way, he represents both destruction and progress, and thus perfectly encapsulates what Lisa Tepes represents: hope in her journey of seeking truth and knowledge, hatred in what was done to her in ignorance and malice. But the Bishop is different. There is no direct representation for him because he is a plot device which represents an ideal beyond a single individual, that of power and subjugation. It is why we never learn his name, because he doesn't need one. The Bishop is a pastiche of humanity's worst attributes. Hate is only useful in the iron grip of eradicating that which displeases us. It must be ameliorated by love and desire, and even fear can play a part in allowing us to understand that which stands in opposition to us. The people will always have something to fear: night creatures, evildoers, vampires. But hate is the only tool in the Church's arsenal because it is the only thing that will allow the Church to hold power in a world where the fear of God cannot save you from the darkness. And thus, the Bishop dies a meaningless, pitiful, and pointless death, because that is all that hatred and power can bring. Hatred is meant to be overcome, not fueled. That is why Trevor, Sypha, and Alucard represent progress and hope, the amelioration of hatred in order to face one's fears and overcome both. And as we move into Season 2, Dracula stops being a plot device character altogether. We see this as he interacts with his war council, and with Hector and Isaac, as he muses over his past and mourns the bleak nature of his present. This war of extermination he has embarked on is both a swan song to the man he once was, and a eulogy to the man he could have been, the man he was becoming because of his love for Lisa. Because in Season 2, we are finally able to answer the 4 questions for Vlad Dracula Tepes, both past and present. He loved to conquer. He hated being undermined, disrespected, and disregarded. He desired equity in diplomacy, and he feared the duplicity of humans. Now that third one might seem like a strange inclusion, but consider how he treated the merchants of Kronstadt. He had no desire to subjugate or punish them until they proved themselves to be untrustworthy in the way they engaged in commerce. And even in his ruthlessness when meting out justice to them, he did so in a fair and balanced manner. He only slew those merchants who betrayed him. He did not target their families. He did not target anyone who did not do him harm. And the man he was becoming had similar answers to the 4 questions, except for one. He loved his family and the personal connections he made. This can even be seen in the fact that he lamented his deception towards Hector, a human, mind you, because he considered both Hector and Isaac to be his friends, people who he trusted. In truth, Season 2 only has a single plot device character, Carmilla. You can somewhat decipher that Carmilla had a single overriding desire: power. But you can't really see what she loves or fears, at least in Season 2. And if there's one thing she hates, it's
men.
Alright. But seriously though, beyond a desire for greater power and control, we can't see any reasoning or ethos behind her actions in Season 2. She tries to paint a picture of not wanting to bow to powerful and arrogant men around her, but this isn't really reflected in her narrative. At least, like I said, not in Season 2. One could point to her backstory, but what she says there indicates that she wanted the man who sired her to give her power and prestige, and chose to kill him and chase it herself. But at least, this is further explored in Season 4. One could point to Dracula summoning her, but from the mere fact that she took her time in answering the call, it's pretty clear that this wasn't an obligation for her. Ultimately, her purpose in Season 2 is to throw a wrench into the works, to undermine and sabotage Dracula's efforts, because the very reason for her choosing to become a part of Dracula's council was to betray him and take the castle for herself. She is ambition incarnate, existing only to further her own goals. Nowhere in the second season does it imply that anyone gets in the way of her convictions or ambitions, other than, not wanting to be betrayed, used, and murdered. Her reasoning, therefore, being tired of bowing to the men and incompetent rulers around her, seems hollow at best and like a thin veneer at worst. A pastiche to cover the fact that she was there to be blade and teeth bared at everyone around her. This in and of itself isn't a bad thing, as long as it serves to shape her narrative over time. And in a way, we do reach this catharsis where Carmilla is concerned, coming to a fuller and more holistic understanding of who she truly is. This, however, does not stop her from being a plot device in the latter two seasons of Castlevania, now joined by the single most infuriatingly implemented plot device character in either series, the Count Saint-Germain. There are other plot devices in these seasons, but we'll get to them a bit later. Now, I like Saint-Germain, where Carmilla is ambition incarnate. He is arrogance incarnate. He's the kind of character who pushes the narrative forward by sheer force of will and intellect. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, let's talk about what makes him a plot device. He loves knowledge. That's about it, really. Seriously, if anyone can answer the 4 questions where he's concerned, please put it in the comments, but before you do, I'll address the elephant in the room. One could say that his desire is to find the woman he loves. So let me ask my lovely viewers a question. Who is she? What is her name? Where did he meet her? What ambitions and motivations drive her forward? Does she pass the Bechdel test? Anyway, the problem with Saint-Germain is that he is, quite literally, chasing after a shadow. This is where the narrative begins to lose its cohesion. Saint-Germain exists in a liminal space where his vague motivation allows the narrative to bend around him, where a plethora of plot devices can be attached to him to push the story forward. He allows us a glimpse into the minds of Sala and the insane monks, so we can see the machinations behind the actions they are taking. Even though they only exist as plot devices by proxy, they represent the night creature, who somehow knows the method by which a portal to the infinite corridor can be opened, and wants to bring Dracula back from hell. 2 plot devices in one, actually. I mean, it isn't even clear why the judge of Lindenfeld allows them to basically do whatever the hell they want for the majority of the season until it is quite literally too late, beyond them being a plot device, of course. But none of that truly explains why all of this happens in the first place, until you look at Saint Germain's role in all of this. The tragic hero, fallen from grace, the larger-than-life figure, exultant in heroic deeds, whose love for a person which represents a virtuous ideal drives him to become a monster, unrecognizable even to the one whom he loved so dearly. The problem with this is that Saint Germain's narrative is far too vague and empty to represent the tragic hero. There are no heroic deeds for him to exult in. We do not know the virtues, if any, of the woman he loves. In a way, it would have been better if she had just been a picture in a locket or pocket watch, because then there wouldn't have been the active but empty shape of a character which never got filled. And his fall from grace was not nearly as impactful as it needed to be in order to properly feel his anguish and corruption. I mean, he feels essentially like the same man before he started murdering people as he did after. And thus, the cults and creatures worshipping death, the corrupted monks, the schemes and plans of vampires, these all feel just haphazard enough that Saint Germain at times feels like an ensemble character, rather than the dark and terrible center of a grand conspiracy. But Saint Germain is the central anchor. It's just everything is far too vague to fully feel this impact, as he slips further and further into depravity. While this transformation is fascinating and tragic to watch, it focuses the story on the one character who isn't actually a character, his lover. If there was some clear impetus, some virtue, which would drive him to fall for this painful and heartbreaking trap, then perhaps we could sympathize with his plight. But whomst among us can sympathize with a shadow? This brings us back to the issue of Carmilla. By the time she says,
Fuck you! I win.
we can answer the 4 questions for her. She loves the sisterhood. She hates the cruelty of men and rulers and what they take from the world. She desires power and dominance. She fears every part of the world around her that isn't within her grasp. And besides her desire, each of these things was probably a defining part of her at one point or another. But the thing that causes her to remain a plot device to the very end is the fact that what she loves, hates, and fears have all become a thin veneer for her desires. In the way that she treats her sisters, it is clear that she not only does not really understand them, she essentially sees them as extensions of herself. Her hatred and fear, once born of necessity, have become the underpinning of her desire in a single, crucial way, and in a way that she herself does not even realize. She has become exactly what she once hated so much. Striga, Morana, and Lenore each have a complete narrative arc through seasons 3 and 4, where we can see the heart of who they are, their vulnerabilities, their personal ethos, their struggles with identity, their raison d'etre. Ultimately, Striga and Morana see beyond the need for pursuing power and having a lust for domination, because Striga simply wants to protect and safeguard that which she holds dear, and Morana wants the comfort of knowing she can make just the right plans and strategies to live a life of freedom and security. And together, they simply want a place where they can have peace and happiness, and not have to fight a forever war for dominance. Lenore wants the peace of mind of knowing that the pain and despair of her past will no longer harm or haunt her, which makes the end of her story all the more bittersweet. But Carmilla has become a reflection of Dracula. Dracula had conquered humans and vampires, science, magic, and alchemy, and reached the pinnacle from which he could only see a hollow, empty eternity. Lisa gave him a reason to live, to explore, and discover, and then he lost her. He went from being a tired old man to having a renewed purpose, and then he lost everything. Carmilla started out by having everything taken from her, experiencing cruelty and hardship, and worked to reclaim all that had been stolen, seeking trusted allies and comrades to achieve this goal. But in her lust for more, the rest of her values became subsumed by her hunger, to the point where she herself became the cruelty and greed she so vehemently despised. In this way, she is actually the inverse of Isaac. Where Isaac started with hollow hatred and eventually learned compassion and reason, Carmilla found compassion and reason in the sisterhood and allowed her own hatred and fear to consume her. Everything she ever wanted was bound within the castle walls and lands of Styria, and she cast it all aside because she couldn't let go of hate and fear, and thus she continued to be a plot device. Except this time she served as the axis of growth and change for both her sisters and for Hector and Isaac. While Isaac started out wanting revenge against Hector, Carmilla came to serve as the primary focus for Isaac to embark on his own hero's journey, just as Carmilla started as the impetus for Hector's journey, to the point that the narrative pinnacles of seasons 3 and 4 were these two Forge Masters, rather than our protagonists. To give a clearer understanding of this, I'm going to juxtapose their narratives against the unfolding story of Season 1 of Nocturne. Julia's death at the hands of Aurochs paints a stark and vivid picture for young Richter. Being the scion of a renowned family of monster hunters and magicians does not make one invincible. That day, his little world is shattered in ways he could not fully comprehend at that time. Richter's origin is that of a boy coming to understand the true nature of the world he is in, and being terrified of what he finds. In a strange way, this mirrors Hector's origin. Hector could not understand the fear and revulsion that others felt when in the presence of his undead animal companions. In his mind, anyone who showed him warmth and companionship was trustworthy, and anyone who showed hostility was not. It's why he couldn't see the betrayal of Dracula, Carmilla, or Lenore coming, even though all three of them had been tipping their hands so plainly that even a brutish simpleton like Godbrand could see Dracula's ultimate goal. Hector's learning process was a painful one, step by step. He had to learn to play the same game everyone else was, and in so doing, realized he had been nothing more than a child playing at being a man. In a similar way, Richter had been trapped for years in a singular, anguished moment. A moment that reflected the fact that he was yet still a fearful, cowardly, and boastful child. He too had come face to face with the terrifying reality that he had been caged by his experiences. Interestingly enough, it was encountering his grandfather, a tired old man who was also trapped in his past, that allowed him to understand the depths of what he needed to fight for and protect. The people he held dear, his friends, and
family.
Isaac, on the other hand, had been forged in blood and hatred, and sought nothing more than the ruination of a species he saw as being unfit to walk the face of the earth. A single moment of absolute compassion and selflessness from Dracula was the first step of dragging him out of this misanthropic mixture of hatred and self-loathing, and the impetus for him embarking on his hero's journey. From a curious old merchant, to a wizened and insightful ship's captain, to a deranged elderly forge master, to a night creature of high intellect with fractured memories of his mortal life. Each encounter brought Isaac to a clearer and a deeper understanding that there was grace, hope, and a capacity for learning in the human heart beyond the hatred he saw so easily reflected in himself. And while, in the end, he still saw Carmilla as a threat to be eliminated, he now did so out of a sense of dark duty, now less of a way to mete out justice for Dracula's death, and more so to stop the rise of yet another tyrant, so that mankind might finally have a chance to prove itself capable of the hope and progress he saw reflected in his chance encounters with those who recognized, even if only in small ways, that a better world was possible. Annette was also forged in blood and hatred, living a life of fear, sorrow, and subjugation as a slave. Her turning point was coming to understand that the bonds of family, heritage, and ancestry were stronger than the chains that bound her. The fires of liberation and revenge might have been a strong impetus for her, much like hatred was for Isaac, but this became mixed with a sense of belonging and community, of reconnecting to a history she never even knew she had lost, to create her own sense of dark duty. Annette killing her former master was as much an act of bloody revenge as it was righteous duty, because she recognized he was one among a number of threats that needed to be eliminated to return peace and prosperity to the world, and to safeguard her friends and comrades. Richter and Annette, as well as everyone surrounding them, Maria and her mother, Edouard, Mizrak, and even Olrox and Drolta, all act as central anchors to keep the plot moving forward. The plot device problem which presents itself in Season 1 of Nocturne isn't any of them, it's actually the plot itself. This is where the solid line of connections I mentioned at the beginning comes in, because it is directly stated that Sypha, Trevor, Alucard, and friends have plans to build a city ostensibly named Belmont, which would be a seat of knowledge, learning, and prosperity, and where all of their combined knowledge could be passed down for the betterment of mankind. So in that case, how is it that the Belmont family line came to be in a state of decline again? What happened to all of that knowledge? Isaac had similar plans, wanting to build a city of learning. Where is it now? The problem with Nocturne is that it feels like it was birthed, whole cloth, out of thin air, with no consideration for any of the events which led up to it. A problem that extends far beyond the incongruities I just mentioned. Maria's father, the abbot, is a strange mixture between the ideologies and characterizations of the bishop and Saint Germain, the heights of faith and the depths of depravity. Just like them, the abbot is a plot device, not because he exists as a series of contradictions, but because we cannot see the through line which led to those contradictions in the first place. He loves God, the church, and the certainty and stability this system brings. Everything else is somewhat ephemeral. He only really hates the revolution because it threatens to upset this stability. He might love Maria and her mother, and fear losing either of them, but this emotional connection is more centered around the progression of the plot than around character development. And we can't really see what desire would have driven him to such utter desperation as to become a Forge Master, and thus entreat the forces of hell itself. On a side note, it also breaks the rules about Forge Masters established in the first series. As Hector explained, there is a deep and familiar connection between a Forge Master and the tool they use to perform their work. Isaac, being a man born of blood and hatred, and steeped in the ways of murder and violence, has a tool that transforms the bloody work of murder into the grim work of sealing a damned soul from hell within a corpse. Hector styled himself as a scholar and a wizard, and for all intents and purposes, he was brilliant in both regards. His process was one of discipline and concentration, an almost sacred rite of building the pathway from hell to create a night creature with each strike of his hammer. Where is that connection with the abbot? What process does he use, besides feeding people into a giant, mysterious machine? This inconsistency almost makes the machine itself into a MacGuffin of sorts. And this consideration leads us to Elizabeth Bathory, the much vaunted vampire messiah. When juxtaposed against Dracula, a man for whom you could see both the heights of his glory and the depths of his sorrow, Elizabeth seems like a pastiche. Her existence is bound up in her glory and majesty, yet we barely see her wield it to any effect before she darkens the sun itself, in a grand display which seems incredibly extravagant for a character we haven't gotten to know very well. In fact, the legend and mythos behind her does more work than she does on screen by the time the season ends. But of course, there is season 2, so we'll see, I suppose. In fact, as much as her characterization isn't explored much, Drolta is a far more interesting character than Elizabeth is. And, well, we see what happened to her. Which brings us full circle to Alucard. The way season 1 of Nocturne is built makes it feel a lot more like a standalone project with strained references than a proper sequel, and thus Alucard's presence at the end feels like yet another strained reference. How is he relevant now, when everything that made him relevant has been washed away from the world? If Nocturne existed in a vacuum, it would be a somewhat flawed but masterful production. As it stands, as a sequel without any of the relevant connections to the first series, save the Belmont name, everything kinda feels like a plot device. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. I know it's been a while since I last uploaded. Life has been a bit of a roller coaster lately, but now that things are settling down, you should be seeing a bit of a more regular schedule from me. Like at least once every 2 months. You'll also notice this video is a bit longer than usual. The longer I analyzed both series, the longer the script became. I had actually planned to upload this 2 months ago. As much as I critique it, I am still looking forward to season 2 of Nocturne. I hope we can get a clearer background of everything that has transpired in the series thus far. Also, quick announcement, I'm setting up a second channel for video game content. I realized I had been trying too hard to force my gaming videos to match the flow of the other videos on this channel. And so, this second channel will neither be dedicated to reviews nor analysis. It will be more along the lines of ideas and themes I find interesting in certain games. Kind of like a journal, actually. In fact, The name of the channel is A Cosmic Gaming Journal, specifically at A Cosmic Journal. There are already this many videos up on the channel, so check it out and let me know what you think. In any case, as always, I thank you for watching and I invite you to like this video and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you again in the next video.